Hey guys, welcome back to another installment of Politics with Roger. I'm Roger, and we talk about politics here. It is September 15th, 2017, and we're going to cover the relevant, important stories of the week. Well, let's just dive right in. We always like to cover what we talked about last week briefly before heading into the stories of this week. Last week, we were touching up on Hurricane Irma, North Korea. We talked about DNC corruption and Amwan. And there's also the repeal of DACA, the Dreamers Act. And those stories were continued into the week. Touching a little bit on Hurricane Irma, there was significant damage in Florida. We see more or less a strong response to both. We have seen strong responses to both Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma. We know this because the corporate mainstream media has not gone on and on with criticism towards the president. And that's not to say that the president deserves all the credit for the strong response. He deserves his credit for his role in the response to the hurricanes, but also the local governments, the state governments and county governments, and just the people in general deserve their credit for the strong response to the hurricanes. People in Florida got out, they evacuated. People in Houston helped each other out. People in Florida helped each other out. So overall, the responses in these events were strong, and thank God for that. There's some discussion out there about whether or not the event was overhyped. People talk about what was before the storm hit land, were people exaggerating the strength of it? Was that a healthy thing? There are examples of that. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. On the one hand, it caused a mass evacuation, which in this case might have been a good thing. Maybe next time people won't buy it. I don't know. These are things to keep our eye on. Just thank goodness we avoided any kind of Hurricane Katrina, because clearly people are much more satisfied with the responses to Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma than they are to Hurricane Katrina. And then the last point about this was the politicization of the weather, which we come to expect any severe weather to be blamed on either global warming or climate change, or who knows what it'll be next. But the usual suspects were out making that case. Moving on to North Korea. I'm not sure how much more we'll be talking about North Korea in the upcoming weeks, unless a really crazy event happens. North Korea, for the most part, seems contained. And I suggest this because it went away in the news. There was a story late in the week that Kim Jong-un fired another missile. It just seems that the cycle keeps repeating itself, where there's a provocation, an escalation of tension, and then the tension kind of simmers, and then we don't talk about it for a while. I've come to the conclusion that we're kind of in a stalemate, but that Americans are safe from North Korea right now, and the situation's is being handled very well. The reason we don't just plow in and go to war to remove Kim Jong-un is because he'll destroy Seoul, South Korea, with the weapons that he has pointed at them, and who knows what kind of damage he would cause also in Japan with his weaponry pointed there. It'd be a chaotic situation, major bloodshed, a suicidal situation from the dictator nation of North Korea, where they just try to blow up everything, wreck everything, and our allies don't want that. The South Koreans don't want that. Can't blame them, and the Japanese don't want that. And also it would create a big mess in China as well. China doesn't want all the refugees rushing in from North Korea. So I think our allies and the neighbors probably would agree that an assassination or some kind of removal of the dictator, peaceful removal, which nobody knows how that would ever happen, but that would probably be the best solution. But we're all waiting, and we'll see if that ever happens. Seems like a stalemate. But in the meantime, Kim Jong-un has one card. That's the "I'll blow everything up" card, and that seems to be working for him for now. And I think that's where we'll be stuck. That seems to be where we've been stuck for years. First story that we want to touch on was the European Muslim terror continuing, and we had an attack in London this morning where an IED was set in the mass transit and the trains, I understand. 22 people were injured. Not sure what the death toll was, but it just feeds into the narrative, the ongoing narrative of terrorism and violence in European cities perpetrated by radical Islamic Muslims. Specifically, Sunni Wahhabi Muslims or Sunni Muslims, how you want to put it, that have been migrating in the last 5-10 years into European cities. Very dangerous, very scary. It seems to be a common occurrence. There's also a hammer attack in France, where 2 women were attacked by a man screaming Allahu Akbar. Attack where a police officer in Paris was attacked, and just so on and so forth. And like we said, the migration of the Syrian refugees, or what the mainstream media and corporate media called the Syrian refugee crisis, has opened the door to a wave of immigration that is creating a ton of violence in Europe. And I would suggest it needs to be reversed immediately, not only in Europe, but we also have to be vigilant in our country. You recall Sadiq Khan, who now has enough political pull. He's the mayor of London, was able to become elected mayor of London, has suggested that this kind of terror is normal in a big city and that we in the West must get used to it. If those aren't fighting words, I don't know what are, and the West needs to wake up to this immediately. Moving on, we'll get the DACA, the DREAM Act that was repealed last week. The unconstitutional executive order that Obama put in place was repealed by Trump by executive order. This was a good thing. You saw early in the week or in midweek a lot of fake news about Trump making an alliance with the Democrats. They are in a negotiation. There is no bill. The bill is going to be, it has to be drafted in the House of Representatives and then passed in the Senate. That's how bills are created in this country, in the legislative branch. And there is no bill. So you saw, it's an interesting narrative in, the anti-Trump media, the mainstream media, corporate media, the progressive media, and I would also say the neocon media, the corporate media, which I would include actors like Fox News in that group. Mark Levin, who I am a fan of, but has become anti-Trump because of who he works for. These guys all jumped on this news that a deal was struck with the Democrats, and did what they could to immediately separate Trump from his support base. I will say, if Trump does not deliver on securing the border, his presidency will be over. Personally, I supported Donald Trump and still do support Donald Trump for his ability to reverse trends of globalism. And the second thing would be to secure the border. Border hasn't been secure since the 50s. Dwight Eisenhower. So, if he does that, if the president is successful in building a wall, or the wall is more symbolic, if he's successful in securing the border, that would be a major accomplishment, a major success by any president in this kind of environment. So I'm not even convinced that he'll be able to do that. He's fighting for it, but there's so much resistance to it. But anyway, you saw the fake news early in the week about a deal being struck, even though there's no bill. We'll see in the future if the border gets secured, but Trump has remained steadfast that this is his priority, to secure the border. To Trump, it's about the border wall, which again I would say is a symbolic gesture, but also an important symbolic gesture that we are serious about securing the border. So the wall is a necessity in that sense. It'll demonstrate the will, and that's where we're at. People talk. I just wanted to make the note about immigration policy, because now the subject of deportation has been coming up more and more. What do we do about the dreamers? And I continue to insist that the most important priority first is to secure the border, which we haven't even done. So I don't know why we would even get into a discussion about deportation until the border is secure. If you have a leaky boat, you'd have to plug the leak before you start bailing water out of the boat, or else you're going to continue to sink. So we have to secure the border before we talk about deportation. When we do talk about deportation, after the border is secured, the first deportation should be radical Islam, men or women with ties to radical Islam, and obviously the non-citizens with ties to radical Islam. We need to look at all Syrian refugees that came over, and a lot of people that came over during the Obama era need to get a look at that. That should be the first group we're moving out. I do know that that felons are being removed now. Felons are being deported now. I would have deported them after the jihadis, but hey, they're deporting felons as we speak. And the Dreamers, we should talk about after we know all the felons and after all the men and women with ties to radical Islam are removed from the country. Then we can talk about the Dreamers. That's my personal position. And I think that's where the president is going with everything. So we'll have to see. But everything is premised on the secure border. Without a secure border, nothing else matters. The president seems to be steadfast in that. And, until we look like we're not going to have a secure border, I'll support the president. Because we need a secure border and we need to reverse trends of globalism or we won't have a country. So moving on.